Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Going to be continuing with the sci-fi kit bash, sci-fi mechanical slash vehicle design here. This one actually inspired by my little son's Lego kit bashing thing that he did. And so I took that base, and as always, starting with a sketch here in Photoshop. And even though I already had the Lego piece that the little guy did, there's still something about sketching it out and kind of having your hand feel the lines and just the act of drawing it out. I think really helps with the process all the way through. There's something about it, there's something really visceral and tangible about drawing something out. So I highly recommend it before jumping into 3D. But yeah, at this point, jumping into 3D now. Starting off with blocks, basic cylinders. And actually here at this point, well, later on in this process, I actually realized that I over modeled this thing, that I put too many details in there, that when I got to the next phase, or to the last phase rather, of taking this back into Photoshop and painting over it, that there's too much detail that I added. So I think there's also a balance here in this process of not overdoing and not over investing in the modeling. So at least for myself, this modeling part is really just to help me with perspective and the proportions of things and the overall silhouette, and not really to design the thing, right? And so later on in the process, I realized that I added too many details here, that to the point where it actually hampered the creativity, right? Like it kind of restricted too much of the sort of the juice, sort of the good stuff, if that makes sense. The box was way too well defined that it actually limited the possibilities, if that makes sense. So I think when you're modeling something out, you gotta sort of find the fine line between what you need out of it versus like actually modeling the thing out, right? Because again, the intention for this thing was to bring it back into Photoshop, and that's where most of the creativity will happen. But what ended up happening was the model was overly detailed to the point where it was actually stopping the creative process. But yeah, so now jumping back into Unreal Engine to do the lighting and the rendering, finding some interesting compositions, some interesting values, right? I decided that this would be sort of a hangar scene, sort of like a repair bay or of some sort for some vehicle or some type of machinery or something. And this dude was up there like taking a break or something like that. I used a lot of reference from like NASA, SpaceX hangars where they would be creating or building out satellites and all that cool stuff. And currently really enamored with very limited color palettes, using a lot of whites and very subtle colors. There's something about the challenge of creating something interesting while being limited with like a certain only a handful of colors And I'm really liking the results so far. So let's see how far I keep walking down this path. But yeah, it's been fun. Like the last couple pieces that I've done have been using the predominantly white paint job sort of thing in a white room with personnel in like lab coats and stuff like that. I'm finding it really fun to do, so we'll see how far it goes. And here at this point I added a couple characters down below too to kind of help sell the distance and the depth of the composition. Otherwise, without those characters, you wouldn't really know how high or how tall this thing was, right? Or how high the dude sitting up there is. So using characters is a really good way to communicate the scale and distances of things. And here, trying to paint over, as always, trying to really remove the 3D aspect of things here. And this is my favorite part, really. It's just so therapeutic, just like painting over and softening the edges and making things a little bit more painterly, There's something about this that I really enjoy doing. It's super relaxing, really meditative. After a long day, after a long stressful day, this is a great thing to do for, just to kind of creatively blow off steam. And yeah, again, I don't want to elaborate too much on what I do outside of this. But I think if you're an artist working in the industry, whether that's film or games or whatever, freelance, there's something about doing personal work that I think is really super beneficial, because even though you enjoy your work, professional work, but there's something very liberating about creating your own artwork that has no confines, that has no sort of limitations, right? It's like really on you, really up to you to make it whatever you want it to be. No constraints, no time limits. And there's something about that I think is extremely important for your artistic well-being. So, if you're an artist, highly encourage you to find time to do personal work. And I know that we all get busy, deadlines, really tight timelines to work towards. But whenever you can, 30 minutes a day, I think it's super important to, do something that is not related to what you do for money, because there's something really magical about just like letting loose creatively. And the benefit of that is that you learn new skills, you learn new tricks, and you sharpen your skills. And I find that whatever I learn here, I actually take back into professional work, right? Like new rendering skills, new painting techniques. And just like sharpening your skills, and it makes me more confident to do the stuff that I do professionally, right? And if you're not a professional yet, obviously you should be doing personal work all the time. if you're aspiring to get into the industry, to break into the games industry or the film industry, you should be drawing like pretty much every day. No question. But what I'm saying is that if you are already a professional, you're making money, I think it's super important to always find a little bit of time here and there throughout the week to sketch out, to do something that's unrelated to what you do, because I think it's super healthy creatively, and I think there's many, many benefits to it. So at this point, I've softened a lot of the edges already. I've covered sort of the 3D tracks at this point. And now adding some line work, which I also really love because it adds this sort of depth to the drawing, to the painting, where, yeah, it's especially where, like, where there's values that are super undefined. Like, for example, there are parts in this painting where it's like super blown out white. You can't tell where the contours are. And adding subtle lines to it really just help the read of things. And there's something super satisfying about adding these lines. It really brings the design to life, I think. With that said, I think, at least for me, overdoing line work is also a bad thing. It's like you got to do just enough of it, right? Just to get the point across. I'm not one to do like super greebly, like super detailed line work. I like to do just enough to get the point across, right? You're trying out some things, trying to add a little bit more interest to the silhouette of the design. But sometimes less is really more, right? Like sometimes there's an urge to add more and more and more things and more things, and in the hopes of making the piece or the design better. But sometimes it doesn't really add more to it. It just makes it worse. So, I think it's still important to try things out to see if it clicks, but also don't be afraid to take it off if it doesn't work. Now working on the character, trying to find a value range that works, that makes it readable. And obviously color is going to help with that. But I think before resorting to color, I really wanted to find a value in grayscale that made him read before adding color to it. So I opted to try a value range that's lower than, that's a little darker than the vehicle or whatever this thing is. I don't even know what it is, to be honest. But yeah, you see, when I toggle the color off, you could see that there's a very distinct value range for the vehicle versus the characters. And so adding a color to it was just sort of an addition as opposed to a crutch, right? That makes sense. Now adding some more organic shapes to it. These ropes hanging down. I think it does two things. So again, the first thing is that it adds some organic irregular shapes to it. Most of this painting is very, very hard surface, very straight lines, angular. But adding the ropes kind of give it that sort of balance, because it's organic and very curvy and irregular, and it adds that extra appeal to the piece, right? And the second thing that it adds is it sells the depth, because as you can see, I really tried to make the top portion of the rope be a little bit thicker than what it is at the bottom, you know? Again, not too much, but to the point where I think is noticeable, and to the point where I think it can sell the distance of this thing from the floor, if that makes sense. And I really felt compelled to do like another one of these things that's like off to the side here. It's cut off. There's something about it not being alone in the hanger, you know, that letting the viewer know that there's more of these things inside here, and it's not just this unique thing. And here again, trying out some things, trying to make something more interesting. Then I decided that it wasn't working, so, you know, take it back to where it was. And again, trying something else here. Finding out that it works better than the last attempt, and ended up keeping it. Now finally adding a little bit more color. Really digging the white and yellow, white and orange sort of combination. Using it very sparingly. Only the parts that I really, really want to highlight, you know? Trying out a bit of color balancing, trying to see if I could balance out the warm overall tone, because the overall lighting is a little bit on the warm side, plus the yellow adds to the warmth. And then I shifted also the character colors to that same yellow, right? And so at this point I'm really leaning hard towards that yellow. And yeah, you know, I was also thinking that there's going to be a point where I need to balance the warmth out with some coolness, but I just leaned heavy onto it and decided to not do anything with the color balancing or adding any photo filters, and just leaned really heavily on the warmth, right? Also with this one, I really tried to experiment with the reflections on the floor there. You know, I wanted to add a little bit more interest to the piece by adding some really hot highlights, and I decided to take some of that as well to the vehicle, or again, whatever this thing is. I still don't know what it is. Yeah, one of the things that I picked up from this one is like, yeah, the highlights as well. Never really tried that before, and pretty pleased with the outcome of the highlights. Yeah, at this point, wrapping it up, and again, adding that color dodge layer that I really think makes the image pop so much, and I love it. It's like magic. And yeah, here we go. Enjoyed this piece. I hope you did too. Catch you in the next one.